The Last Share, The Last Snare. By David Hall. The 16th of April, 2025. Chapter Breakdown. The Spoils of War. The First Cut. Broken Gold. The Fall. The Last Snare. Chapter 1, The Spoils of War. The final echo of steel striking flesh faded into the stone. The chamber pulsed with a low, ominous silence, broken only by the last groan of the dungeon's dying guardian, a great obsidian worm, coiled now in its death throes, its black blood smoking as it hissed across runes in the floor. With a heavy final breath, it collapsed. A ripple of golden light rolled across the chamber, and the great doors at the far end creaked open. They had done it. Ha! Thorn lowered his sword, the blade clinking against his dented shield. And they said this place was cursed. Dead gods, that thing almost took my arm, did you see that? I counted 13 times it nearly did, Kylith replied, brushing soot from her midnight blue robes. Her fingers sparked faintly with lingering magic. But perhaps you were simply in the way. Enough, Bran said, voice tight as he knelt beside the fallen beast. He made the sign of the balanced scales over its corpse, murmuring a prayer in a tongue older than stone. Even monsters deserve last rites. Vera crouched near the massive doors, already scanning the path beyond. We'll have time for sermons later. It's open. And beyond that door, gold. Piled in careless, glittering heaps, scattered across platforms of jade and obsidian. Coins from kingdoms long gone. Jeweled chalices, magic scrolls, armor, and blades humming with dormant power. One relic alone, a silver circlet pulsing with sky fire, was worth more than any noble's estate. 5 adventurers stepped forward into the horde of legends. Only one would leave. They stepped through the threshold like pilgrims entering a holy site, boots crunching on coins and gemstone shards. The vault was massive, a cathedral of greed. Statues of long-forgotten kings lined the walls, their eyeless sockets filled with sapphire tears. Between them, braziers lit with unnatural green fire cast flickering shadows across the treasure. Merrick whistled low, spinning a gold coin between his fingers. Well, friends. Looks like we finally made it to the pot at the end of the bloody rainbow. And not a leprechaun in sight, Vera muttered, keeping her bow lowered, but not entirely relaxed. Her eyes moved constantly, walls, ceiling, floor, tracing patterns and cracks only a seasoned scout would notice. Doesn't mean the danger's over. Agreed, Kylith said, walking along the edge of the treasure with care, her fingers twitching in the practiced motion of a mage preparing wards. This much wealth does not sit untouched for centuries without being protected. There's likely enchantments, curses, worse. Bran, ever the anchor of reason, strode toward the central dais, a stone platform raised by dragonbone pillars. Resting atop it was a chest carved from obsidian and banded in silver. Something pulsed faintly inside, like a heartbeat. We came for that, he said, pointing to the chest. Not the gold. That's distraction. Thorn snorted. Speak for yourself. That distraction just solved all our problems. He kicked over a helmet overflowing with gems and bent down, scooping a ruby the size of an egg. My family's land, rebuilt. My banner, raised again. All of it, finally within reach. Then may your ancestors thank us, Kylith said, dryly. We all bled for it. Merrick gave a theatrical bow. And bled together, no less. Such camaraderie. Such loyalty. Surely that makes the spoils easier to divide, no? There was a pause. A subtle shift in the air. They all looked at the chest. They all looked at each other. Vera was the first to speak. We had a plan. Thorn said. Equal shares. Split 5 ways. Bran nodded. That was the agreement. 1/5 each. Merrick smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Right. And yet, what happens when 1/5 of something can burn cities, buy kings, and shatter empires? Gold changes the weight of promises. Funny thing, that. Kylith crouched near the chest, her fingers just shy of its lid. Wisps of magic drifted from the seams. There are artifacts in here. Not just wealth, power. Some of these objects are older than the continent. And? Thorn asked, watching her. Kylith glanced up. Some of us may be more qualified to wield such things. Like hell, Vera muttered. Thorn took a step forward. Let's not start that again. You mean the part where Kylith decided she should keep the Staff of Ashfall because she understood it better than the rest of us? Vera said, rising to her feet, fingers tightening on her bowstring. Or maybe when Merrick accidentally pocketed those runestones last time we cleared a ruin. Merrick placed a hand over his heart in mock offense. Accusations, Vera. I'm wounded. You will be, she shot back. Bran moved between them. Enough. We've come too far to let this spiral into squabbling. We are not thieves fighting over scraps in a gutter. Merrick tilted his head. Aren't we? Just better dressed and with more expensive scraps. Kylith stood and finally touched the chest. The moment her hand made contact, the pulse within quickened, a thudding rhythm, like the drumbeat of something waking. She withdrew her hand and stared at it, blinking. I could unseal it, she murmured. But perhaps I shouldn't. Open it, Thorn said. We all deserve to see what we've bled for. Kylith hesitated, then, with a whispered incantation and a flick of her wrist, the silver bands peeled away like ribbons. The chest opened. Inside, resting atop a velvet lining of deepest black, was a crown. Simple. Elegant. A circlet of pure gold and white crystal, inlaid with ancient glyphs. It radiated power, not in a blazing, dangerous way, but with something worse, promise. The kind of power that whispered of thrones and thunders, of destinies forged in fire. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Thorn broke the silence. I'll take the crown. You'll what? Vera blinked. I said I'll take the crown, Thorn repeated, stepping forward with the air of a man claiming something that was always his. Look at it. It's a relic of rulership. Command. Blood and legacy. It belongs with a knight of noble line, not a thief, or a hedgemage, or a sellsword. Kylith's eyes narrowed. Careful, Thorn. You're starting to sound like your grandfather. And we all remember how his bid for power ended. Merrick gave a low chuckle. Axe to the back of the head, if I recall. Thorn's jaw clenched, but he kept his gaze on the crown. This could restore my house. Unite the border holds. Bring order. Bran raised a hand. No. This isn't why we came. Then why did we come? Thorn snapped. For coin. Trinkets. No, we came for a future. You'd leave power like this buried in dust and forgotten shadows. I'd leave it where it belongs, Bran said, voice cold. This dungeon was sealed for a reason. Merrick whistled. So now the priest plays gatekeeper. Saints above, you're all so noble until the shine hits your eyes. He stepped toward the chest, hand casually brushing a dagger at his hip. Look. Let's be adults. Split the coin, sure. But the artifacts? We draft lots. Roll dice. Whatever it takes. Fair's fair. Unless the dice don't fall your way, Vera said. Then what? Merrick gave her a sideways grin. Then I get creative. Kylith turned, robes swishing. We're one breath away from drawing steel. Not yet, Bran said, stepping between them. We are not animals. Thorn, still staring at the crown, spoke without looking up. Maybe not. But animals don't get rich. Or rule. Another pause. This one longer. Heavier. The kind of silence that knows exactly what comes next. But not here. Not yet. Vera finally broke it, her voice low. We'll make camp here. Rest. Eat. Talk. Then we divide. Together. No one argued, but no one truly agreed either. They simply drifted apart, like wolves pretending not to notice the meat between them. Each found a corner of the vault to claim, and watched the others just a little too closely. As the cold green fire crackled from the braziers, the treasure gleamed quietly around them. Waiting. Chapter 2, The First Cut. Sleep came slow, and trust slower. Though none said it aloud, each kept a hand close to their weapon that night. In the heart of the vault, they huddled among mountains of gold, but the warmth of victory had long since cooled. It was as if the treasure itself breathed distrust into the air. Merrick lounged on a pile of furs and silks, one eye half-lidded, the other watching Vera across the room. She was seated on a low pedestal, bow across her lap, sharpening a knife with slow, deliberate strokes. The rasp of stone on steel was a steady counterpoint to the low crackle of the braziers. Can't sleep, he asked, voice lazy. Can't trust, she replied without looking up. Merrick smirked. You wound me. You'd know if I meant to. Across the chamber, Bran sat cross-legged in prayer, muttering quiet litanies to the Light Father. His sword lay unsheathed beside him, not raised, not idle. Ready. Always ready. Thorn hadn't moved far from the crown. It now rested on a velvet cloth beside him, untouched but never out of reach. His gaze lingered on it the way a starving man watches bread. Kylith kept her distance, her corner dimmed by arcane wards. Runes flickered faintly in the stone around her, protective circles drawn with powdered silver and bloodroot ash. She hadn't spoken since the argument. Just watched. Calculated. Morning, or what passed for it underground, came in slow lightless hours. Bran was the first to rise, stretching and donning his armor piece by piece. It's time we settle this. Peacefully, if possible. That ship's sinking, Priest Merrick yawned. But by all means, lead us to calm waters. Thorn stood, tightening the straps on his gauntlets. I'm taking the crown. We haven't decided, Vera said, voice sharp. Thorn's hand moved to his blade. And then everything happened at once. Steel hissed. Vera's arrow was knocked before the first blade was fully drawn. She didn't fire, not yet, but it was enough to hold Thorn's hand in motion. You're making this harder than it has to be, he said, his voice low, tight. This treasure is more than any of you understand. Kylith's voice drifted out from the shadows of her warded circle. Oh, we understand. We just don't care about your crusade. You'd rather see it squandered. We'd rather live, Vera said. But that option feels thinner by the minute. Merrick stood now, slowly brushing the dust from his coat. His eyes flicked between Thorn, Kylith, and Vera with calculating calm. You all keep posturing like this is a matter of ideals. It's not. It's about opportunity. Let's stop lying about it. Then say it plain, Bran said, stepping between Thorn and Vera. You want more than your share. Merrick shrugged. I want what's useful. The crown. It's shiny. Dangerous. So is she, he gestured toward Kylith, and she's got half a dozen spells prepped and ready. How about this, we keep the peace. We pick what suits us best. We leave here alive. Thorn scoffed. You'd say anything to avoid a fight you're not sure you can win. No, Merrick said, drawing a dagger with a flick of his wrist. Just anything to delay the first cut. There was a silence. And then Kylith muttered a word of power. It shimmered out from her in a ring, breaking her warding circle. In the same breath, Thorn lunged, not at her, but at Bran. Steel met steel. Bran caught the blow on his shield and staggered back, eyes wide. Thorn. You were never going to let me take it, Thorn snarled. You judge, but you're no better. Vera shouted something, her voice lost in the sudden chaos as she loosed an arrow, not at Thorn, but at Merrick, whose dagger was halfway to Kylith's throat. The shaft caught Merrick in the shoulder, spinning him. He dropped the dagger, cursed, and vanished in a puff of shadow, one of his tricks. Kylith retaliated with a blast of arcane force, sending a ripple through the chamber that shook the treasure piles and shattered a brazier against the far wall. Gold and gems scattered like shrapnel. The dungeon echoed with violence. Bran turned, parried another strike from Thorn, and bellowed, "Stop this! For the light's sake!" Thorn roared, no longer hearing. Vera had drawn another arrow, but Kylith grabbed her with a spell-laced hand and yanked her into a glowing sigil. "Stop interfering!" Vera's form shimmered, and for a moment she was frozen, time-locked, eyes blazing with fury, mouth mid-curse. Merrick reappeared behind Kylith, blood staining his tunic. She spun too late. His short blade found her side. Kylith screamed. Arcane energy exploded from her in a death burst, sending Merrick flying and searing the stone walls with burning runes. Her body hit the ground, smoking. Bran knocked Thorn's sword from his hand and held him at blade point, breathing hard. "It's done. Enough." But it wasn't. Merrick rose, staggering, burned but grinning. "That's one down." Bran didn't lower his sword. Thorn didn't raise his hands. And somewhere across the vault, Vera's spell hold cracked, her scream of rage rebounding as she broke free. Smoke curled in the air. The scent of scorched silk and blood lingered with a bitter sharpness. Kylith's body lay still, her fingers blackened from the spell that had consumed her in death. Her runes had burned themselves into the floor, hissing faintly as the last embers of her magic died away. Vera stood beside her, breathing hard, sweat soaking through her leather tunic. The mage's blood still steamed on her boots. Across the vault, Merrick leaned against a broken column, a blood-stained cloth pressed to his side. He was grinning through gritted teeth, but the grin didn't reach his eyes. Well, that escalated quickly. "Silence!" Bran snapped, his shield hanging low, sword still at the ready. He turned his eyes on Vera. "Are you all right?" "I will be," she said. Her voice was raw, flat. "I didn't want this." "No one did," Bran murmured. "Speak for yourself," Merrick coughed. Thorn stood slumped against the pedestal, one gauntlet shaking as he held his side. The priest had cracked 2 of his ribs with that last blow. She was going to kill me, he said, eyes unfocused. She would have killed all of us. Bran stepped forward. So you struck first. She was already casting. You aimed for me, Thorn. Not her. I didn't want the light's judgment, Thorn said bitterly. I wanted the god's damned crown. He looked down at it now, still resting on its velvet cloth. Its golden surface reflected the blood and firelight, gleaming like something alive. A thing of beauty. A thing of ruin. No one moved to touch it. Vera spoke, breaking the silence. We bury her. Or burn her. She deserves that. Bran nodded solemnly. We all deserve better than this. She got what she deserved, Merrick muttered. Vera spun, but Bran raised a hand. Not now. There was a long pause. 4 adventurers remained. No words passed between them as they gathered Kyle-Elitha's body. A pyre was built in the far corner of the vault, her spellbook placed at her feet. Bran murmured rites while Vera watched with eyes like flint. Thorn did not attend the burning. Merrick stood at the edge of the firelight, arms crossed. His expression was unreadable. The flames rose. The vault flickered. And something ancient stirred in the depths of the dungeon, quiet, subtle. Watching. Waiting. Chapter 3, Broken Gold. The chamber had gone quiet. The flames of Kyle-Elitha's pyre crackled in the far corner, but the rest of the dungeon was still, eerie and oppressive. The only sounds now were the soft echo of breathing and the shuffle of boots across stone. Vera stood with her back to the treasure, watching the rest of the group carefully. She kept her eyes off the glinting gold, off the cursed crown that had already caused so much bloodshed. It seemed to mock them in the silence, a thing of beauty, a thing of ruin. Bran, now sitting against the wall, was the first to speak. His voice was hoarse, his body still humming with the exertion of the battle. We'll leave. We'll carry her out, and we'll tell the others, tell them the truth. That this place is cursed. That it's not worth it. Thorn let out a bitter laugh from the far corner. His ribs were still sore, the blood in his side dried into his armor. Truth. Is that what you want to tell the world, Bran? That we killed each other for a crown? That the truth is something we can't even hold? The tension in the room thickened, pulling the air taut like a bowstring. No one spoke for a long time, and yet, the words were already hanging in the air like smoke. Merrick, leaning casually against the stone arch, ran a finger along the edge of a silver coin. He turned it in his hand, watching the reflection of the flickering firelight dance in the metal. His voice was calm, collected, almost too calm. It's not about the truth. Not anymore. Vera's eyes narrowed. Then what is it about, Merrick? Merrick didn't meet her gaze immediately. Instead, his eyes lingered on the crown, the gleam of it almost hypnotic. It's about what we deserve. Thorn's hand tightened around his sword hilt at the words. And you think you deserve it? After all this? I think Merrick said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, we all deserve it. But only one of us can walk out of here with it. Bran pushed himself up slowly, his posture still tight, but with an almost defeated look. We can't let this madness continue. Kyle-Elitha's dead. This ends here. But Merrick didn't seem to care. He took a step closer to the treasure and swept a hand over the pile, letting the gold coin slip through his fingers like sand. I'm not leaving here without what's mine. Thorn let out a low growl. So, this is how it ends, then. We fight over scraps. Over something that doesn't matter anymore. Vera's eyes flicked to the crown again, her hand instinctively resting on the hilt of her bow. The temptation was there, pulling at her, a promise of power, of riches, of revenge. But something else lingered too. A deeper, darker thought. The other three noticed it, and they all paused. In that moment, the tension that had only been simmering before seemed to boil over. You all seem to forget, Vera spoke slowly, her voice low, that there are traps in this place. Traps that we don't even know how to disarm. We've been lucky so far. Merrick laughed, shaking his head. Lucky? You call this luck? No, Vera said, but I call it a warning. The air felt thicker now, as if the dungeon itself was breathing with them. Every step forward felt like an act of defiance. Every glance at the treasure felt like a betrayal. Thorn spat, his eyes flashing. You think I care about traps? After everything? Bran's face softened, and he shook his head, walking toward Vera. Enough. This treasure, this madness, will ruin us. We leave. We live. But Merrick, grinning, took another step toward the pile. Not without what's mine. Before anyone could stop him, he reached for the crown. Merrick's fingers brushed the cold, ancient metal of the crown, his eyes gleaming with something predatory, something cold. The others froze as if the very air had turned to stone. Vera's heart pounded. She took a step forward, her voice sharp. Merrick. Don't. But Merrick didn't pause. He slid the crown from its velvet cushion, the weight of it in his hand an undeniable temptation. The golden circlet gleamed, mocking them with its promise of power. He held it up to the flickering light, turning it slowly as if admiring its perfect craftsmanship. It's mine, he muttered, his voice thick with greed. I deserve it. All of this. None of us deserve this, Bran said firmly, his voice like a lash in the stillness. His hand rested on his sword hilt, his body coiled tight like a bowstring. He was ready. Ready for what, though? The sudden realization that there would be no more talking, no more reasoning, hung heavily in the air. Vera's eyes darted to the treasure chest and the piles of gold surrounding them. It felt like the dungeon itself had taken a deep breath, waiting for something to give. The walls seemed to shift in her vision, as though they were closing in, the treasure an illusion, a trap just as much as the ones hidden in the shadows. We can't go on like this, she said, her voice breaking. Kylitha's dead because of this damned crown. Look at what we've become. You think it's worth it? This madness. Merrick turned toward her, a cold, humorless smile curling on his lips. Do you think I care about Kylith? She got in my way. Thorn spat on the floor, his lip curling. You sick bastard. You're all fools, Merrick retorted, his voice rising. We've risked our lives for this. All of us. And if you think I'm going to walk out empty-handed after all this, well, you can keep dreaming. This is mine, and no one, he turned to Bran, then to Vera, his gaze lingering on Thorn, is going to stop me. Vera stepped forward, her bow drawn in a heartbeat, but her hands trembled. She hesitated, knowing that to draw an arrow would be to cross a line from which there would be no return. And yet, the thought of what they had all lost, of Kylith, of their bond as adventurers, of the very ideals they had once shared, pushed her to the edge. You think I won't kill you for it, she growled. A silence fell over the room, thick and suffocating. They all knew how far they were from the edge of reason. The golden crown now seemed like a curse rather than a prize. Bran moved first. He lunged at Merrick, sword raised, the steel flashing in the torchlight. Merrick was ready, spinning to the side and meeting him with his dagger. The two collided with a crash, their blades singing through the air. Vera had no time to react before Thorn's hand was on her arm, dragging her back as Merrick and Bran fought for dominance. The clashing of steel rang in her ears, a cruel, discordant symphony. "Stop!" Thorn shouted, his voice ragged with desperation. "This is nothing." But it was already too late. Merrick spun, throwing Bran back with a fierce grunt. His dagger found its mark, a shallow cut to Bran's cheek, blood dripping onto the stone. Vera's instincts kicked in. She released her bowstring, the arrow flying across the room. It struck Merrick's arm, just above the elbow. He howled in pain, dropping the crown for the briefest of moments. But it was enough. Bran, still bleeding but fueled by rage, swept forward, knocking Merrick aside and grabbing the golden crown. It wasn't over yet. Not by a long shot. Bran lifted the crown high, staring down at Merrick, whose blooded face twisted in fury. His voice was low, trembling with both rage and something darker. "You think this is over? You think you'll get away with this?" Merrick's laughter was a bitter rasp. "Of course not, Bran. But I'll make sure none of you get away with it." He sprang forward, reckless and feral. The battle raged on in the dark, the treasure, the gold, the crown, forgotten for a moment as they fought over the right to claim what they had come for. It was no longer about the treasure, but about something deeper. Pride. Power. The desire to hold something, anything, in a place that had already taken so much. And yet, as they fought, the shadows stirred once more. Thorn, too weak to join the fray, moved toward the far wall, where the stone seemed to pulse with an unnatural rhythm. A soft hum filled the chamber, growing louder, louder. Something had been triggered. Bran barely noticed the change, too consumed by the violence, too consumed by the adrenaline to care about the deeper consequences. Merrick, on the other hand, stopped mid-strike, his eyes darting to the walls as the hum turned to a low growl, a vibration through the very stone. "What?" Bran started, eyes narrowing. The others stopped too, their gazes drawn to the walls as the sound became more insistent. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Thorn's eyes widened. "It's a trap," he whispered, voice hoarse. Too late. Chapter 4, The Fall. The stone beneath their feet rumbled. At first, it was subtle, a vibration, a shift. But then, the ground cracked with an ominous groan, echoing through the chamber. Thorn's breath caught in his throat. The air grew thick with the metallic scent of something ancient, something wicked. "Get out!" Thorn screamed, his voice cracking as the walls of the dungeon seemed to come alive. The others froze, their eyes darting around in confusion. It was too late for hesitation. The dark shadows on the walls rippled, like something in the depths of a nightmare awakening to claim them all. Merrick, still bleeding from the arrow in his arm, staggered backward, his hand gripping the crown tighter. His eyes gleamed with desperation, the glint of madness deepening. "I'm not leaving," he growled, his voice raw and frantic. "This is mine." The stone beneath his feet cracked again, this time with more force, and a loud grinding sound filled the chamber, followed by the horrifying shriek of ancient mechanisms being set in motion. The treasure around them, once a symbol of victory, now seemed like a cruel reminder of their folly. Bran moved quickly, grabbing Merrick's shoulder. "Listen to me," he barked, his voice edged with panic. "The dungeon is collapsing. The treasure isn't worth it, none of this is worth it if we die here. But Merrick shook him off, his eyes wild. I earned this, he spat. This crown, this treasure, it's all mine. He lifted it higher, the gold gleaming in his hand as if to defy the very earth beneath him. A deep, resonating hiss filled the room, followed by a sharp, mechanical click. The chamber shuddered as massive stone doors began to close slowly, blocking the only known exit. The adventurers' hearts pounded as they realized that they were sealed in. No! Vera shouted, her voice breaking through the chaos. We need to go, now. Thorn was already moving, his legs pumping with frantic speed as he darted toward the far side of the room. The stone doors were closing fast, their weight immense, and the mechanism groaned as it struggled against time. He could already hear the grinding of the traps coming to life, a low, haunting hum as if the dungeon itself were feeding on their fear. Merrick, however, remained still, transfixed by the crown, his body rigid as though the golden circlet had enchanted him. I won't leave. I won't. Merrick. Bran shouted. But Merrick did not hear him. Or perhaps he didn't care. Vera's hands shook as she knocked an arrow, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. We have to leave him. It's too late, she urged, her eyes meeting Bran's. Bran looked back at her, torn between the bond of friendship and the gut-wrenching reality that their time was running out. We can't leave him, he muttered, eyes darting to Merrick, whose expression was blank, locked in a trance-like state. He's one of us. We don't leave anyone behind. Vera's gaze hardened. If we don't leave now, we'll all die here. She turned toward the massive stone doors, now less than a foot away from closing. A deep rumble shook the room as a sudden explosion of dust erupted from the ground, and a hidden panel in the far wall opened. A wall of jagged steel spikes shot out, blocking the room in every direction. The trap had been triggered, and now it was sealing them in. No one would leave. Merrick's eyes finally flickered as the rumble grew louder, but it was too late. The floor beneath him gave way, and the trap he'd triggered so carelessly activated with a resounding crash. A series of spikes shot up from beneath his feet, piercing him through the chest. His scream echoed through the chamber, but it was quickly cut off as the deadly mechanism claimed him. Thorn reached out with a final, futile attempt to save him, but Merrick's body was already pinned, his life snuffed out in an instant. His grip on the crown loosened, but the golden circlet remained wedged in his clenched fingers. No! Vera shouted, her voice high-pitched with shock and grief. She ran forward, but it was too late to pull Merrick's lifeless form free. The once proud adventurer now lay dead in the very treasure vault they had fought so hard to reach. Bran stood frozen, his face pale with disbelief. He's gone. Vera's eyes narrowed as she grabbed Bran's arm, pulling him toward the door. We have to go. Now. The walls were closing in faster now, the air growing thick and hot as the traps continued to activate. The floor beneath them was shifting, the chamber trembling as if it were collapsing on itself. Panic gripped them all as the only hope of survival lay in escaping before the dungeon became their tomb. Move! Thorn shouted again, urgency coloring his voice. We can't outrun this. We'll be crushed. Vera was the first to push through the narrowing gap in the stone doors, her arms flailing as she scrambled forward. Bran followed, pulling Thorn with him, their every movement desperate as the stone room continued its violent transformation. The sound of the rumbling continued behind them, and as they turned one last time to glance at the treasure room, they saw it for what it truly was, a place of death, a place of regret. No longer a vault of riches, but a crypt, an eternal tomb for those too blinded by greed to escape its grasp. And then, they were out. They sprinted into the corridor beyond, gasping for air as the stone doors sealed shut behind them with a thunderous crash. They had escaped the deadly trap, but the cost of their survival weighed heavily on them. They had lost Merrick. But worse still, they had lost everything. Chapter 5, The Last Snare. The corridor stretched out before Thorn, silent and oppressive. The dust in the air felt heavier than before, thick with the weight of the dungeon's secrets. He couldn't hear the others. It was as though the world had gone still, everything muffled by the oppressive silence of the dungeon's deeper halls. He had been running. He had been screaming. But now it was only him. He was the last one left. The crown was still clutched tightly in his hands, the gold gleaming faintly in the dim light. He hadn't even noticed he was still holding it. Not until now, when he realized that the treasure he had fought so hard for was the only thing he had left. The others, they were all gone. Bran, Vera, Merrick, their faces flashed in his mind, each one a reminder of the madness that had overtaken them. They had all died in the end, falling victim to their greed, their desperation. He had managed to survive, to escape the trap that had killed them. But now, as he walked deeper into the dungeon's labyrinthine halls, something gnawed at the back of his mind. A feeling, a sensation. He didn't know it yet, but it was the dread of the last snare waiting for him. Thorn's hand trembled as he wiped sweat from his brow. The dungeon was unnaturally warm, and the walls seemed to pulse with life. Every step he took felt heavier than the last, the silence pressing in on him. He had been so focused on surviving, so focused on making it out alive, that he had forgotten one crucial thing. The dungeon didn't just claim lives, it claimed the living. The corridor curved ahead, and Thorn's breath quickened as he saw a faint light at the end. The exit. He could almost taste the freedom. Almost. The golden crown, now a symbol of his victory, was clutched tightly in his hand. But it wasn't just the crown that had captured him, it was the loot itself. The wealth. The power. He could hear his heart pounding louder in his ears now, drowning out the silence. He wasn't going to die. He couldn't. Not after everything. Not after surviving the others. But as he neared the exit, he slowed his pace, suddenly wary of the passage ahead. Something didn't feel right. The air was too thick, the shadows too deep. He had a nagging feeling that he was walking into a trap. It's just your mind playing tricks, he told himself. You're almost there. Almost free. Thorn stepped forward, his footfall echoing in the silence. Then, with a low, hissing sound, the floor beneath him gave way. The trap was triggered. For a brief moment, Thorn felt the floor shift, a violent jolt of motion, followed by the shrill sound of ancient mechanisms groaning into action. Too late, he realized he had stepped onto the wrong section of the floor, the trap that none of them had noticed until now. Stone panels slid open from beneath him, and jagged metal spikes shot up from the ground. The trap was designed to catch and impale anyone foolish enough to walk into its maw. Thorn gasped, his body jerking back, but it was already too late. His foot had already triggered the final deadly snare. He could hear the horrible screech of the spikes as they rose toward him, the sharp metal glinting in the pale light, their tips aimed directly for his chest. In his panic, Thorn tried to jump back, but the floor shifted again, and he lost his footing, falling to his knees. The spikes drove up with terrifying speed, striking his chest, his abdomen, and his legs. He gasped as the cold steel pierced his flesh, feeling the life drain out of him with every agonizing second. He tried to scream, but no sound came from his mouth. His vision blurred, and the crown in his hand slipped, falling from his grip. It hit the ground with a soft, dull thud, the gold gleaming mockingly as it lay just out of reach. Thorn's heart raced in his chest, but it was already slowing. His body was numb, the shock overwhelming the pain. The world around him dimmed, and the walls of the dungeon seemed to close in, as if the ancient stones were claiming him, just as they had claimed the others. He hadn't even thought to check for traps. Too late, he realized that in the end, it wasn't the treasure that had killed them. It wasn't the crown, the loot, or even the fight. It was the dungeon itself, a place of death and deceit, where those who dared to enter were always doomed to fail. The last thing Thorn saw was the dim flicker of the dungeon's light, and the faint outline of the crown, glinting in the gloom. Then, everything went black. The dungeon had claimed its final victim. Ultimately, no one won. Greed proved to be the ultimate weapon. The dungeon had done its job perfectly. The gold was lost, the treasure was lost, the party was lost. All of it was lost. It would be an age before anyone else ventured into this dungeon again, by which time, the party would be naught but dust and bone, a warning to those who dared to venture into the dungeon again. The end.